actually one of the criticisms which I think has been very fairly levelled at social platforms is you're happy to be involved in the money-making part of the process. You're not so happy to be involved in the parts of the process like actually paying journalists insurance so they can go and report from places like Syria or Yemen. You're not so fond of paying the legal bills that journalism incurs and the publishing risk that you incur when you do difficult stories about holding power to account. So that cherry picking, if you like, is something which, if you look in this current nascent experiment with journalism, it would be really nice to see a significant shift from the platform companies actually into paying for some of those more expensive parts of journalism. And it would be nice to see journalism engaging with social platforms as well to help some of the executives negotiate a world where you will be imprisoned for what you do with information, where you will be targeted by propagandists and by terrorists for bringing truth and light to the world. The reintermediation of information, which once looks as though it's going to be really fully democratized by the progress of the open web, is likely to make mechanisms for funding journalism get worse before they get better. And I think that this is why it's so important for us to have an open and transparent conversation about how these new relationships can actually deliver something of genuine value to all parts of the community. When you look at the prospects ahead of us, as I say, I think that Apple, Facebook, Google, Twitter, they all have to satisfy not the requirements of the free press, but the requirements of Wall Street, which are very different from the requirements of the free press. So I think it's fair to say it would not be too speculative to suggest that journalism and publishing hasn't finished its decline into unprofitability quite yet. I think we're going to see many more companies shutter print, as we have with The Independent. 300 local newspapers have gone out of print, if not completely off the web, within the last 10 years. I think that any outlet which currently hasn't found a sustainable model for journalism is going to have to do so soon. And that may well require investment from extremely rich people like those in Silicon Valley to keep the field sustainable. Because I'm not sure that the difficult, dirty and dangerous business of making journalism is ever actually going to be profitable again. And I think sort of to be sustainable, news companies have to radically alter their cost bases. So the next wave of media companies, and we see this a bit with BuzzFeed, is really to sort of get rid of all of that cost of which distribution and publishing is part. And as the social media companies are offering you this free outlet, this free software, these bigger audiences, the impetus not just to publish your articles on there, but also to think Facebook will take care of the technology, it will sell the advertising for me, is going to be really significant. So again, I don't think we're not at the end of that journey. I think we will see much fuller integration of what we currently think of as journalism and publishing with the open web. I don't know that I've convinced you. I've only got like a few more paragraphs to do that in. So the leaders of technologies companies really do need, I think, to recognise that with great power comes great responsibility, which the National French Convention had in 1793, and then I think Spider-Man in 1962. But the broader question for society is really whether social platforms and big tech can be trusted to be transparent enough. And if they can't be trusted, and I don't think we can leave this to trust, what mechanisms are open for us? The media sector in the UK, and I know this because I used to write about it, is incredibly heavily regulated, actually. And yet, there seems to be a complete absence of knowledge or public debate around some of the issues here, around this transfer of economic power, of free speech, of the public sphere to a small set of privately held American companies who are redrawing, if you like, the rules of engagement. As I say, I don't say that as a criticism. I think they'll do it a lot better than some of the people who've been doing it in the past. I can't really understand how we can spend so long debating press regulation in this country and not touch on what's happening to distribution once. You can go through the whole of the Leveson report. You will find no mention of any of this, and that happened within the last 5 years. One pressing issue, I think, is how we should frame this in the context of the current mauling of the BBC. The BBC has a business model which is largely immune from death by Snapchat. And it's got a rich history, actually, of thinking about how technology and content can combine for public good. And it seems particularly short-sighted to be putting it under existential threat at the present moment. I know that probably the Conservative frontbench would not agree with me, but we have think tanks, policy centres, regulators, even reporters, I think should be doing a much better job at picking away at this complex new paradigm. And really the BBC's capabilities ought to be central to the debate rather than completely marginal, and the debate not to be happening. It would be a mistake, in my opinion, not to include platform technologies and imagining how we want our public sphere and societies to work in the same way that we consider the BBC, the press and other utilities within this picture. We've heard the BBC actually express its desire to become a platform, but I haven't actually seen any indication that anybody who has power at the BBC really understands what that actually means. So it might be invigorating to actually see a public service organisation help define standards for digital publishing, which can help all journalism rather than simply a small, confined part of it. I think there's a role for centres of excellence like this one, like Crash, like the Tower Centre at Columbia, which I run, to foster and promote the exchange of ideas around civic technology and communications. So what happens to the current class of news publishers is a much less important question than what kind of news and information society we want to create and how we can help shape this. None of this is meant to say, I think we should be doing everything we possibly can to preserve. I think we should be doing everything we possibly can to preserve The Guardian, but I would say that, wouldn't I? But I don't think this is about preserving what is there at the moment. I think it is about looking at what is valuable about what we have at the moment and not losing it in a transition which is more profound and more destabilising than anything we've seen before. And actually now is the time to do it as well, because those questions are still in flux. This hasn't yet... there's a great academic in America called Zeynep Tufekci who is Turkish, who is a sociologist who writes about technology. And she says, this system hasn't ossified yet. There are lots of things where people are able to be persuaded or argued with or lobbied, and we should be doing that now, because once, if you like, the die is cast, and once those figures of scale increase, it's too late. Then it will be too late to go back. So we should be doing that right now. I am sentimental, has to be said, about the roar of the presses and the filthy, filthy offices and the terrible nicotine habits of people who are in newsrooms like the Spotlight newsroom. But I think those trappings of journalism are probably best consigned to the dustbin of history. But I think many of us who are legitimately concerned that journalism in all its forms doesn't emerge from this period of technological advancement weakened rather than strengthened. And we really want to see the protections and resources that we had extended to future generations of journalists, however that happens. Just as journalism companies are thinking about how they shift the production towards distributed model, so platform companies need to think about their own internal organisations, I think, to support journalism and active journalism without a commitment to reliable information. Social media ultimately comes unstuck as an economic force. I would actually like Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Larry Page, Tim Cook, and whichever man, or hopefully woman, so, who is the next communications billionaire, to really consider themselves as publishers, not simply a technology company. I'd like them to take seriously the fragility of good journalism and what steps are needed to make sure it thrives and recognise their important role in that. Maybe next time Mark Zuckerberg's asked if he's a platform or a publisher, he'll answer, what's the difference?